Hello. This is a presentation on depression and anxiety in 3 weird countries and 3 non-weird countries. So my first piece of research that I analyzed was math anxiety in Spain. So this study focused on studying students who didn't really like math, and they concluded that it's more of like a premise that they don't like math because they feel anxious about it because they've never really been good at math, so they have reason to be worried and to underperform in math classes. So the way they structured this study was that they had this class that was a sort of meta study class. So they would learn math throughout the semester, and the class would let them know how well they were learning and what areas they were missing out in. And it was basically like a feedback class. They would tell the students how they were doing, and they would also tell the teachers where they would provide teachers with the same type of feedback. And so by the end of the semester, students who attended this class pretty often, their math anxiety got lowered, which I think makes sense, given a type of bird's eye perspective on math itself. That would probably make you less anxious about the whole topic. So the measurement methods were, they just tested the students' math anxiety at the beginning and at the end of the semester. And yeah, the kids who attended that thing were less anxious in math. The next piece of research is actually a lecture by Leo Strauss. It's on German nihilism, so I included this into my weird research papers because a lot of philosophy is pretty Western idea. Like a lot of French people and Germans and Europe, they did a bulk of the thinking that influences most of our education system. So I think it's an extremely Western thing. And the East has its own philosophy too, but that's not really integrated into our culture. That's more of like a collectivist type of thinking. So in this research, or in this philosophy lecture, Leo Strauss has 14 dimensions of nihilism, the history, and a bunch of stuff. But what particularly relates to this presentation is his section 5. He speaks about philosophy or nihilism in youth, and how this sort of breeds anxiety and depression. One of the main points he makes is that the youth, they think as much as the negation of what the elders have taught them. So if the elder people teach structure and order and everything, then the opposite of that is chaos and, nihilism. And so it brews anxiety and depression because there's just so much out there that it's easy to get anxious and worry about stuff, and then eventually get depressed. So that was his main point about nihilism in the youth. So it's like a Western idea, so that's why I put that in here. I think it's pretty important in understanding the overarching theme of depression and nihilism and anxiety. The third piece is social anxiety in Canada. So here we had 81 undergraduate volunteers from Ontario, and they were asked to do 4 self-report inventories. And so those things measured different dimensions of social anxiety. So the way they perceived themselves, the way they perceived other people, symptoms from social anxiety, like tapping your feet or rubbing your thumbs or something. And so what they found was that social anxiety is a little counterintuitive. So it's mostly uh, you make a big expectation of yourself to fulfill some type of image, and so you get anxious about not being able to fulfill that. And also socially anxious people, they perceive socially anxious people more negatively, which is counterintuitive because, or I would have thought that they might be more empathetic, but that's actually not the case. So those are my three weird lecture or research papers. So the first piece of non-weird research is depression in Sub-Saharan Africa. So one thing I wanted to point out is that this is actually conducted by Westerners. So it's like Western studies adapted to a different region of the world. So here, the Westerners, they went to 16 different African countries, and they basically gave people a self-report inventory, but the people taking the test were specifically asked to think out loud. And so their thoughts were interpreted by a psychologist who basically kind of did another report on the individual people, so that I guess the African language could be put into some sort of like Western conceptualization of what of their depression. What they found was there's a lot of somatic expressions. So something like my heart aches, or my head doesn't, I worry too much, or they don't even say worry. It's like I think too much. So yeah, it's just a different way of viewing this whole thing. So yeah, a lot of somatic expressions. The next one is anxiety in Turkey. So here we had 4,800 Turkish university students. So this study was also a little interesting because Turkey, it's not really considered Western because it's pretty close to the East, but there's universities there. It's a non-democratic government, so I put this on the non-weird side. But this study was pretty similar overall. They had the students take a self-report inventory and about anxiety, about state anxiety and trait anxiety. So state anxiety is when you're anxious and in an appropriate state. So maybe before a job interview or before something important happens, you might feel that natural sort of worry. And trait anxiety is when anxiousness is part of who you are, which is different, because then you might feel anxious in situations where you really have no reason to feel anxious. Their findings were that anxiety at that specific university had gone up in the past 10 years. So this kind of relates back to kind of like the German nihilism thing, or how this whole world is basically getting more anxious and depressed. It seems like, anyways. The last study is the most different, in my opinion. It's Hikikomori in Japan. So it's those people who stay indoors all day and they isolate themselves from the real world, and they play video games and they live with their parents. So the Turkish study is made by Turkish psychologists. So that's like a country studying itself, versus the Sub-Saharan African was like Westerners studying it. And so the Hikikomori in Japan, this is also Japanese studying their own society, because they noticed that there's a bunch of hermits staying indoors all day, and so that was kind of